Hello, everybody, and good evening. My name's Don Arleth, and you're watching World News Tonight, live from Warsaw. This weekend's bilateral peace talks between Russia and Ukraine were canceled, but a trilateral meeting, which will include the United States, is scheduled to take place in Abu Dhabi on February 4th and 5th. We'll have more on that in just a moment, but first, let's take a look at tonight's headlines. Ukraine works with SpaceX to block Starlink access by Russia. Thousands of demonstrators take to the streets in support of the Czech president. And 6 years on, were the promises of Brexit fulfilled? Tonight, we'll take a look back. In Kyiv, the steady hum of generators has become part of everyday life. And while temporary ceasefire on energy infrastructure is holding, it hasn't stopped Russia from launching drone and missile attacks, including a strike on a maternity ward in Zaporizhzhia, injuring 9, and an attack on a bus carrying minors in the Dnipropetrovsk region, killing 15. So how much goodwill has Russia shown before the talks resume this week between Russia, Ukraine, and the United States? Pavel has more.
Power generators are working at full capacity on the streets of Kyiv. Despite a one-week ceasefire on targeting energy infrastructure, access to electricity and heating still can't be taken for granted.
Sometimes it's on, sometimes it's off, and right now it's difficult.
For now, at least, the ceasefire holds.
The situation did not get worse, but it's remain on the same level as before.
In the country's capital, emergency heating centers provide some warmth and electricity. And the city's residents try to preserve some semblance of normalcy. But the ceasefire only applies to energy infrastructure. Civilians are still being terrorized by missile and drone strikes. In the Dnipropetrovsk region, 15 miners were killed in a drone strike on Sunday as they were returning home from their shifts by bus. At least 6 people were injured in a strike on a maternity hospital in Zaporizhzhia. And in the city of Dnipro, a drone strike killed civilians.
2 bodies, a husband and wife.
Ukrainian forces keep withstanding pressure on the front line. But there is no pause in fighting in sight. And the peace talks that were supposed to be held in Abu Dhabi this weekend have been postponed. With the US shifting its attention to Iran, the next round of negotiations is expected to start on Wednesday.
We are in constant communication with the American side and are expecting specific details from them regarding further meetings.
These trilateral talks, however, won't be attended by the heads of states, but by negotiating teams.
And I hope that they come up with some concrete proposals that they can take to their 2 presidents, their 3 presidents, the President Trump and President Putin and President Zelensky. That's the purpose of these conversations. It's not to come to an agreement.
The very agreement, it seems, is still a distant prospect. But as the war is about to enter its 5th year, the Ukrainians only keep proving their resolve.
When you bomb civilian populations and you attack kindergartens and you attack hospitals, you attack maternity wards and you attack civilian high-rise apartments, you anger them. You make the Ukrainians, in this case, more determined than ever to prevail. They are not going to submit to this barbarism.
Pavel Trzaskowski for TVP World.
What once helped keep Ukraine online under fire and is the backbone of military communications has also been quietly turned against it. Ukrainian officials say that Russia has been using stolen or unauthorized Starlink terminals to boost drone attacks, prompting Kyiv and SpaceX to roll out emergency measures to block them. So what progress has been made on this front? Our defense correspondent Zuzana Jurek explains.
Technology so effective, everyone wanted a piece of it to bolster their capabilities. On Sunday, Ukraine's defense minister Mikhail Fedorov said that in collaboration with Elon Musk's SpaceX, Kyiv had stopped Russia's unauthorized use of Starlink terminals.
Ukraine, together with Starlink, has already taken the first steps that delivered rapid results in countering Russian drones. The next step is implementing a system that will allow only authorized terminals to operate on the territory of Ukraine. Unverified terminals will be disabled.
Elon Musk himself was quick to praise these joint efforts.
Looks like the steps we took to stop the unauthorized use of Starlink by Russia have worked. Let us know if more needs to be done.
On Tuesday, the Institute for the Study of War confirmed that the Kremlin had been targeting Ukraine with Starlink-enhanced Shahed drones beginning in September 2024 and Molniya strike drones since the beginning of December 2025.
Russian forces are increasingly using Starlink satellite systems to extend the range of BM-35 strike drones to conduct mid-range strikes against the Ukrainian rear. The reported 500-kilometer range of Starlink-equipped BM-35 drones places most of Ukraine, all of Moldova, and parts of Poland, Romania, and Lithuania in range of these drones if launched from Russia or occupied Ukraine.
SpaceX has introduced speed-based geofencing. Terminals are now programmed to automatically shut down if they detect movement exceeding 75 to 90 kilometers per hour, making them obsolete for Russian drones which travel at 2 to 3 times that. Though Musk was willing to support Ukraine with the Starlink capture, he could not abstain from his usual pleasantries when called out for allowing the terminals to fall into Russia's hands in the first place.
This drooling imbecile doesn't even realize that Starlink is the backbone of Ukraine military communications.
That's how Musk lashed out against Radosław Sikorski, when Poland's foreign minister urged the tech billionaire to shut down Russia's use of Starlinks after the reports first emerged.
Hey, big man, Elon Musk, why don't you stop the Russians from using Starlinks to target Ukrainian cities? Making money on war crimes may damage your brand.
But contrary to Musk's assertion, Poland, which supplied almost a half of Ukraine's Starlink stockpiles and pays $50 million in fees annually to maintain the service, is acutely aware of its importance for Ukraine's military and civilians alike.
Ukrainian armed forces are using Starlinks on the front lines. It's probably the only way to get internet access, to communicate with your relatives, with your family members, saying, I'm fine, I'm doing well, and something like that. Second, that when there is no electricity, it's difficult to recharge your phone, to have internet, and Starlink provides internet connection to civilian Ukrainians. These communities are communicating between them in big cities.
And as Serhiy Flashbez-Krestnov, an advisor to the Ukrainian defense minister, observed, geofencing is only a short-term fix.
I want to emphasize that the current solutions are temporary, or to put it another way, emergency, and will be replaced by a global, well-thought-out solution that will take time.
Bezkresnov noted that the Ukrainian military will now attempt to determine the number of Starlinks across the army. Ensuring the technology is successfully blocked from Russia's use, however, might prove a challenge. For TV World, Zuzanna Jurek.
The streets of Prague became a stage for a growing political crisis as tens of thousands of demonstrators rallied behind President Petr Pavel. At the center of this unrest is his rejection of controversial nominee for Environment Minister, a move that has triggered accusations of blackmail and widened divisions inside Czech politics. Diana Skaya brings us the details.
Chanting fills Prague's Old Town Square. Thousands of demonstrators marching under one clear banner and one clear message: we stand with the president. The rally comes as tensions inside Czech politics have reached a boiling point. These protesters are backing Czech President Petr Pavel, who is now locked in a dispute with Foreign Minister Petr Macinka. At the heart of the conflict, President Pavel's refusal to appoint MP Filip Turek as Environment Minister, a decision that has since sparked a major political showdown.
His name is Filip Turek, who is well known for having actually published various Nazi statements, but basically he's a totally discredited character. And the president, Petr Pavel, who is kind of the last remaining person who is normal in Czech politics, basically has been saying that he is not going to accept this Filip Turek into that ministerial post.
On Tuesday, the president went public. He accused Foreign Minister Petr Macinka of attempting to blackmail him through late-night text messages sent via an advisor. The presidential office later released the messages. Macinka denies the accusations, calling the texts normal political negotiation. But the dispute has widened.
Babiš, Machinka, and Okamura are a danger to the entire Czech Republic, and that is why we are here to support Milion Chvílek.
Organized by the civic group Milion Chvílek pro Demokracii, A Million Moments for Democracy, its supporters say they are defending democratic values, the rule of law, and the Czech Republic's place in the European Union.
Why are we here today? We are here to stand up against cronyism, arrogance, and blackmail.
The president's direct election by voters, rather than parliament, is now central to the debate.
I mean, Machinka shouldn't be in any position of influence. One other interesting thing, if I may, he is connected to the former Czech Prime Minister Václav Klaus, who is now incredibly pro-Russian. And Machinka has been making various pro-Russian steps.
The dispute also reveals deeper divisions over foreign policy. President Pavel strongly supports military aid to Ukraine. The government remains much more skeptical.
The country is full of people who are now saying, we have had enough.
Where Czech politics goes next will highly depend on just how much power the streets and the presidency can ultimately hold. For TVP World, I'm Diana Skaya.
President Donald Trump's comments during the Davos Economic Forum, ruling out the use of force to acquire Greenland, brought relief both on the island and in Denmark itself. But experts say the annexation rhetoric and criticism of NATO allies have already strained ties and done real damage. Sonia Gatabishchan reports from Copenhagen.
In the aftermath of the World Economic Forum in Davos, the people of Denmark and Greenland breathed a sigh of relief, at least regarding the fact that the United States President Donald Trump said that he would not use force to acquire Greenland, semi-autonomous territory of Denmark. And while that is a positive development, some experts note that Trump's talk of annexation to date already caused lasting damage.
In terms of US-Danish Greenlandic relations, those have been completely destroyed for decades to come. I think there's this sense in Denmark and Greenland of resentment and disillusionment and a feeling of betrayal. And I think, especially if you take a look at Denmark, Denmark used to be, along with the United Kingdom, one of the most pro-US countries in the world and in Europe, and for this crisis to unfold like it has, I think has just been a major blow.
The relations between the US and Denmark took another hit some days ago when Donald Trump said that NATO allies held back from the front line in Afghanistan. In response, Danish veterans held a silent march on Saturday in Copenhagen because they said they lacked words to illustrate how much it hurts to see that their contributions in what they describe as the fight for peace, freedom and democracy seem to be forgotten in the White House.
I think it's disrespectful. He's not telling the truth. He's changing the history, and he can't change the history. He can just look in history books and then he'll know we were there.
When it comes to the Danish contribution to Afghanistan, it needs to be said that the Danes went to Helmand region in Afghanistan, among other places, one of the most violent and unstable areas of Afghanistan, and suffered some of the most horrendous casualty figures of all the allies in Afghanistan.
Following Donald Trump's statements regarding NATO allies, 44 flags were placed in front of the United States Embassy in Copenhagen to commemorate the 44 Danish soldiers that were killed in Afghanistan. The flags were then removed, reportedly by the U.S. Embassy's personnel. And how did it make you feel to see the flags removed in front of the U.S. Embassy?
I feel a little offended, I think.
I think somebody was ordered to move the flags, and then they figured out it was a mistake, a big mistake, when they found out who the flags were for.
Having seen the damage that this caused, the U.S. ambassador reportedly reinstated them there himself. From Copenhagen, for TVP World, I'm Sonia Gatabishchan.
Saturday marked 6 years since Britain shut the door on the European Union. There were tears, cheers, and promises of freedom and taking control of the country's destiny. Tonight, we rewind to that moment and ask what Brexit really delivered years after the celebrations faded. Pavel Czaskovsky brings us more.
It was only 6 years ago, but it already feels like a different era. Britain leaves the European Union on January 31st, 2020. Brexit becomes a reality.
We are now a free and independent country once again. We can make our own laws. We can levy our own taxes. We can make our country safe again. It's wonderful.
For the likes of Penelope Smallboon, this wonder began sometime around 2013. That was when David Cameron, the Prime Minister of the Conservative Party, feeling pressure from some of his own MPs and Nigel Farage's rapidly growing Eurosceptic Independence Party, promised a referendum on Britain's future in the European Union if he won the next elections. Britain was then riding a wave of dissatisfaction with its membership in the bloc. Bureaucracy, immigration and the lingering effects of the 2008 financial crisis on the economy were the main drivers that fueled the anti-EU sentiments. The vote eventually went in favour of the Conservatives and Cameron had to bite the bullet. The in or out referendum was on.
My view is it's good to have the debate. The referendum, the in-out referendum creates that opportunity.
Cameron himself led the campaign to stay.
I believe we are stronger, safer and better off inside a reformed European Union.
But there was no stopping the wave. On June 23, 2016, the Brits decided they are out. 51.9% voted to leave, 48.1% to stay. A tight race, but eventually, after some tug-of-war domestically and in Brussels, there was no turning back.
Find out what happens when it happens, don't we?
And as it happened 6 years ago already, what does Brexit feel like now?
So I disagreed with Brexit then and I disagree with it now.
I can actually see after Brexit has been more difficult to actually find people, as in before there were continuously people looking for jobs.
It's less fun to travel to Europe. It's a bit more of a hassle. Instinctively, it feels like no, it's not a good decision.
These instincts are shared by nearly two-thirds of Britons, with the detrimental impact on the economy cited as the main reason for dissatisfaction.
Most of the intellectual elite and the system were shocked by the outcome, knowing that it would be an economic negative, which obviously it has been, and it continues to be so.
The UK's exchange with the European Union amounted to more than 50% of its trade. Leaving the common market meant doing business with the continent got more complicated and costly.
A rushed and ill-conceived Brexit that brought further disruption, as businesses trying to trade were faced with extra costs and extra paperwork.
Small businesses suffered the most.
We've really lost the market in Europe. For me, it's finished the market. Yeah. It's very difficult now for me to transport things from Europe to England.
But in the bigger picture, everybody suffered. According to research by Cambridge Econometrics, in 2023 the average Briton was £2,000 worse off than before Brexit, and the British economy as a whole was almost £140 billion smaller. According to recent data from the National Bureau of Economic Research, the country's GDP per capita was up to 8% lower than it would have been without Brexit. Investment was up to 18% lower, and employment and productivity were both even 4% lower. A re-engagement with the European market could remedy these problems, especially given the tectonic shift that is happening across the Atlantic. And there are indications that the current Labour government might be inclined to move in this direction.
As part of their own campaign to be re-elected after the next election, the Labour government is, I think, quite likely to consider campaigning on rejoining the single market in some form.
And a Brexit reset is already said to be in the works of Keir Starmer's government. Deals on food and energy trade with the EU are underway, and more are in the pipeline, with Starmer vowing to use the upcoming summer summit with the EU for further Brexit unwind. Paweł Trzaskowski for TVP World.
Nagoya got a rare musical send-off this weekend as the Warsaw Philharmonic Orchestra wrapped up its Japan tour at the city's Prefectural Art Theatre, joined by prize winners from the 2025 Chopin competition. Gabriela Fesnak was there and has this report.
Audiophiles in Nagoya were in for a treat this weekend. Warsaw Philharmonic Orchestra, accompanied by the winners of the 2025 Chopin competition, performed at the city's Prefectural Arts Theatre for the final show of their Japan tour. Japan is often described as the country that loves Chopin just as much as Poland, and the performers agree that playing his music for a Japanese audience is a one-of-a-kind experience.
Well, it's very special here. I'm well aware of Japanese people's great love for Chopin. They've always been very supportive over the years, and they love to follow also the Chopin competition, of course.
Japan is certainly a really important country to me, one of my favorite countries to visit and to play. Japanese audiences, of course, is a very special type of audiences. They listen very carefully and they follow what the pianist and what the music does to them.
I feel like Japan is the right place to do this tour in. They're all, I feel, very much into Chopin and they're all very respectful.
Due to the popularity of Chopin's music in Japan, the organizers don't even need to promote the tour. The tickets sell out within minutes nonetheless.
Chopin is undoubtedly one of the most beloved composers in Japan. The tour doesn't need any promotion because the fans are waiting for it to be announced and often travel with us from city to city because seeing the performance just once isn't enough.
It's a Japanese agency that organizes this tour after every Chopin competition. No other country does such a tour, and it shows how important Chopin is in Japan.
The program includes Chopin's piano concertos and selected solo pieces presented at each stage of the competition.
Chopin's music is the pinnacle of the beauty that the piano as an instrument can offer. Performing his pieces is both the most difficult task and the greatest joy.
With the Nagoya show closing the Japanese leg of the tour, the artist will now travel to South Korea for the grand finale at the Seoul Arts Center. For TVP World, Gabriela Fesnak.
Bilateral negotiations between Russia and Ukraine were called off over the weekend. Next week, the U.S. will join trilateral discussions in Abu Dhabi on Wednesday and Thursday. Meanwhile, it's still unknown if Russia will make good on a week-long ceasefire on energy infrastructure. Irregardless, Russia has stepped up attacks on civilians, killing 15 miners in a bus in the Dnipropetrovsk region on Sunday. Now, joining me to discuss this and more is Mark Toth, co-founder of Interp 360. Hello, Mark, and thanks so much for joining us on on World News Tonight.
Don, great to see you. Great to be back. Thank you.
Yes, so these bilateral talks were called off over the weekend, moved to trilateral talks on Wednesday and Thursday. The big hurdles are the territory in the Donbass and the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Do you see any glimmer of hope of a compromise being reached?
Don, I don't. Look, there was some kabuki theater this week, again, going on. Speaking of Nagoya, place that I lived as a young child in Japan, between Putin and President Zelensky. Putin, through Emirat, was basically saying, come to Moscow, we can negotiate this. Zelensky's not that dumb. He's not going to sign his own death warrant, but traveling to Moscow. And so he, in turn, tweaked Putin and said, come to Kyiv if you dare. That tells me that a lot of the reasons that this bilateral broke down is that there's just no concurrence or even close to a concurrence of agreement on how to treat the Donbass in that regard. I know many have suggested that the military buildup, the U.S. military buildup in Iran is one reason these were postponed. I doubt that. I think the U.S. is still in a building up phase there. I don't think that's what has happened. The thing that has my attention right now in terms of how these move forward, to answer your question, is this surprise visit visit from Kirill Dmitriev, Putin's special envoy to the United States, to Miami overnight, where he met with Steve Witkoff, the U.S. negotiator representing Trump. That's concerning to me because it tells me this. Whenever the Russians feel that Zelensky's getting the upper hand in these negotiations, Kirill Dmitriev pops back up in the picture, and he just did. Tried to find out what was said, can't find out. At this point, all we know is they claim, at least Witkoff does, I say that skeptically, that they were constructive and useful.
When it comes to Steve Witkoff, you know, I'm just curious, maybe you have an opinion on this. Is there a time when President Donald Trump might lose patience with the progress or lack thereof, is typically what we're seeing from Steve Witkoff, that he could potentially maybe be replaced?
You know, Don, I'd hope so. I just don't believe that we're there at this point in time. Look, Steve Witkoff is a guy that basically is an economic guy by background, commercial real estate developer, views these negotiations very much from an economic standpoint of view. So when he and Kirill Dmitriev get together like they did before and in previous meetings, it's almost like in a bad mafia movie where Kirill Dmitriev's role is to be the money bag guy, to bring the the promises of Russian riches in a post-war environment to Steve Witkoff to try to get concessions from the Trump administration. I think that's a message, though, in theory, that Trump likes to hear. He wants to see the world in an economic viewpoint, wants to see past the war prematurely, mind you, and thinks that this is all about ultimately striking a business deal. It didn't work for the European Union in terms of how you approached oil and energy channels for you, and it won't work for the U.S. in any kind of long-term arrangement if we think we can strike a similar business deal. Putin's not interested in business deals. He's interested in Ukraine, and ultimately he's interested in Eastern Europe, including Poland, unfortunately.
Well, Donald Trump, the Trump administration, has said a good deal would mean that neither side is 100% happy. Both will have to make concessions. Can you envision such a situation when it comes to the Donbass and Zaporizhzhia? Is there something that's not being discussed right now that could potentially be a way for both sides to get there?
Yeah, Don, it's a great question, but it's a difficult one to answer because I do think, and it concerns me as an analyst, there's been slippage in how we describe this territory in the Donbass as fortress belt lines that are so key to Ukraine's defense, that protects Sumy, protects Kyiv, protects Odessa, and protects Kiev from Russian advances, is that we tend to talk about them anymore as Ukrainian occupied territory. Newsflash, it's not occupied territory. It's Ukrainian sovereign territory. And I think that's the big dilemma here, is that the ask that Trump is asking and that Putin is demanding of Zelensky is to cede this sovereign territory. And that's just not likely to happen. I still think, despite the horrific costs, human costs that's going on in Ukraine, that if that's put to a referendum, Ukrainians are going to say no. Look, they know in 2014 that didn't work with the Donbass and in terms of Crimea. Putin only came back in 2022. It's fool's gold to think that. Yes, security guarantees would be great, but unless there's a robust post-war force along any kind of demilitarized zone, I don't see it working. And I think the pushback should be, if Russia wants a demilitarized zone, then let's build it inside of Russia. Put it there. Don't argue that somehow Ukraine has to give up its sovereign territory. That's just madness. It didn't work in the lead up to World War II. It's not going to work now.
According to a report from CSIS, since February of 22, Russian forces have suffered nearly 1.2 million casualties, more losses than any major power in any war since World War II. After seizing the initiative in 2024, Russian forces have also only advanced at an average rate of between 15 and 70 meters per day in their most prominent offensives. So slower than almost any major offensive campaigns that we have seen in war in the last century. Now, what does that say about Russia's war in Ukraine? How many more losses can Russia take?
Yeah, I think it's a question, and it's a great point that you're making, because if you compare it to World War II, look, Stalin, someone that Putin likes to model himself after these days, marched all the way to Berlin in the same time period and conquered Nazi Germany in part. so far, in most guidelines, maybe, in most assessments, I should say, maybe Putin has advanced 50 to 70 kilometers in any given area of eastern Ukraine. It's been a dismal failure. The one thing, though, that he's willing to keep doing, unfortunately, if you're a Russian, is to keep throwing young Russian soldiers into this meat grinder. And as you said, it's accurate. 1.2 million have either been killed or maimed in this war that's going nowhere. And to have accomplished what? They basically gather, slightly less than 80% of the Donbass. It's been a strategic failure. But at this point, we just don't see any signs that Putin is willing to back off of that. He's willing to keep spending Russian lives to do it, even though his economy is in shambles, even though he's killing his own people, even though Russia's economy eventually is going to implode because of trapped economic growth. That's just a bubble because of the war economy that they're in. There's nothing good for Russia in the long run. And I think that almost forces him in a kind of in a dystopian way to keep fighting a war, because stopping it would be a disaster for him economically, militarily, and probably lead to his demise.
Absolute madness. Well, Mark Toth, I appreciate the discussion. Always enjoy having you on. Thanks for joining us on World News Tonight.
Thank you, Don. Take care. Good night to you and your viewers.
And that concludes this edition of World News Tonight. Thank you for joining us. Have a great evening, and hope to see you next time. Good night.